You know that feeling when your car makes a weird noise and you immediately start doing mental math in your head? Like, okay, if this is the transmission, that's 2 grand, maybe three, and you're already calculating which credit card has room or whether you can push it another month, or if you'll have to ask your parents for help, even though you're 34 years old and that conversation makes you want to disappear into the floor. Yeah, that feeling. That very specific financial anxiety that lives somewhere between your chest and your stomach and never really goes away. It just gets quieter sometimes. My name is Dan, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, human psychology, and why some people seem to glide through financial challenges while others wake up at 3 a.m. doing math about car repairs. And here's the thing I've realized, something that honestly changed how I think about wealth entirely. The difference between having nothing and having $25,000 is a completely different universe than the difference between having $25,000 and having $250,000. I'm talking about a fundamental shift in how you experience reality, not just your bank account. And once you understand why, it kind of reframes everything about how we chase money in the first place. So let me paint a picture. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, and I mean really living that way, not just saying it, every single financial decision carries this weight. You're not just buying groceries, you're basically playing chess with your bank account. You're thinking, okay, if I buy the good bread instead of the cheap bread, does that mean I can't get gas until Friday? If I get gas now, do I have enough for the electricity bill? And if I'm short on the electricity bill, can I pay it late without a fee? And if there is a fee, that's another $35 I don't have. It's exhausting. It's this constant low-grade stress that most people don't even realize is there until it's gone. And here's what people who've never experienced this don't understand. It's not just about the money. It's about the mental energy. When you're constantly worried about making it to the next paycheck, you can't think about next year. You can't think about your career goals or your health or your relationships because your brain is just trying to solve the immediate problem of how to pay for groceries and keep the lights on. I once spent 3 hours calculating whether I could afford to get my car's oil changed or if I should wait another month. 3 hours. Not because the oil change was expensive, it was like $40, but because that $40 was the difference between eating decent meals or living on ramen. This is what living paycheck to paycheck actually looks like. It's not dramatic. It's just this grinding, relentless stress about small decisions that shouldn't be stressful, but are, because there's no margin for error. There's no buffer. There's no breathing room. And the worst part? Everyone around you who isn't in this situation thinks you're just bad with money. But the reality is, when you're broke, you're making incredibly calculated, strategic financial decisions constantly. You're just making them from a position of zero power. Now, here's what $25,000 does, and this is the magical part. It doesn't make you rich. Let's be honest, $25,000 is not quit your job and sail around the world money. But you know what it is? It's my car broke down and I'm annoyed but not terrified money. It's I can leave a job that's destroying my mental health without immediately becoming homeless money. It's I don't check my bank account before buying coffee money. Basically, 25 grand gives you the single most valuable thing money can buy: options. And I don't mean options like choosing between a Tesla and a BMW. I mean options like choosing between a bad situation and literally anything else. Let me give you a concrete example. Your boss is abusive. The environment is terrible. You're stressed constantly. But you can't leave because you need the paycheck. But with $25,000 in the bank, suddenly you can quit. You can take a month to find something better. You can say no to things that are destroying you. That's not just financial freedom, that's actual, real freedom. Or your car breaks down, transmission's gone, $3,000. If you have $0 saved, this is a catastrophe. You can't get to work, you might lose your job, you're looking at predatory payment plans. But with $25,000, it sucks, but you're not terrified. You pay for it, you move on. The problem gets solved instead of becoming a spiral. The psychological shift here is massive, because when you're living in survival mode, you can't think long term. You can't take calculated risks. But that first chunk of financial cushion, it flips a switch in your brain. Suddenly, you can breathe. You can think about next year instead of next Friday. You can make decisions based on what you want, not just what you can barely afford. The jump from 0 to 25,000, that's the jump from trapped to free. That's the jump from panic to peace. That's the jump that actually changes your life. Here's where it gets weird though. Let's say you go from $25,000 to $250,000. That's 10 times more money, right? 10 times the security, 10 times the freedom, 10 times the happiness. Except, no, not even close. There's actually research on this, the whole money buys happiness up to a point thing. Basically, once you hit somewhere between $60,000 and $90,000 a year in income, additional money doesn't really increase your day-to-day happiness much at all. When you jump from 0 to $25,000, you're solving real problems. You're buying peace of mind. You're buying the ability to sleep through the night without anxiety dreams about overdraft fees. Those are fundamental, life-changing improvements. But when you go from $25,000 to $250,000, I remember talking to someone who went from making $45,000 a year to making $200,000. And she said, yeah, my life is nicer now, obviously, but I'm not happier. I'm just stressed about different things. And that's it right there. Once you hit that baseline of financial stability, more money starts solving problems you didn't even know were problems until you had money to worry about them. When you're broke, you're thinking about whether you can afford to eat this week. When you have money, suddenly you're stressed about whether you're investing correctly, or if you're saving enough for retirement, or if your kid should go to private school. These are nicer problems to have, obviously, but they're still problems. And here's what nobody talks about. The more money you have, the more you have to manage, the more decisions you have to make. And yes, having options is better than not having options, but at a certain point, too many options becomes its own form of stress. So yeah, the jump from $25,000 to $250,000 is nice, it's comfortable, but it's not transformative in the same way. It's not the difference between panic and peace. It's the difference between peace and slightly fancier peace. Let's get specific. When you're broke, genuinely struggling financially, your problems are concrete and immediate. You need $800 for rent. You need $150 for car insurance, or you literally can't drive to work. You need $60 for medication. These aren't abstract problems. They're survival problems dressed up in monthly bills. And these problems have consequences. If you don't pay rent, you get evicted. If you don't pay for car insurance, you can't work. If you don't buy your medication, your health deteriorates. $25,000 solves almost all of those immediate problems. It gives you breathing room. It gives you what financial people call an emergency fund. But what it really is dignity. It's the dignity of not having to beg, not having to explain, not having to choose between humiliation and hardship. But here's the thing about $250,000. What does that solve that $25,000 doesn't? Well, you can buy a nicer car, you can take a really nice vacation, you can live in a fancier neighborhood, you can renovate your kitchen. And don't get me wrong, these things are nice, but they're not life-changing in the same way. They're not the difference between panic and peace. They're the difference between peace and slightly upgraded peace. These are what I call nice-to-have problems. Should we renovate the kitchen this year or next year? Should we go to Italy or France? These are problems that only exist when your basic needs are already met. They're optimization problems, not survival problems. I think we underestimate how much of happiness is just the absence of acute stress. The jump from constant financial anxiety to basic stability is enormous. But the jump from basic stability to luxury? It's pleasant, it's convenient, but it's not transformative in the same way. And here's something that kind of blew my mind. The freedom that $25,000 gives you is actually more meaningful than the freedom $250,000 gives you. I know that sounds backwards, but stay with me. When you have that first chunk of money saved, $20,000, $25,000, you suddenly have the freedom to make different choices. You can leave a toxic job. You can move to a different city. You can say no to things that don't serve you. This is real freedom, the kind that changes the trajectory of your entire life. But when you have $250,000, most people just stay in their lane. They might upgrade their lifestyle, but they don't fundamentally change their life. They're still doing the same job, often working even harder because once you're at that level, you've usually built a lifestyle that requires it. The nice house, the private schools, the car payments. You're not more free, you're just more comfortable in a bigger cage. I know people making $300,000 a year who feel like they can't quit their jobs. They hate what they do, they're burned out, but they've built a life that requires that income. They're trapped by their own success. Whereas I know people who have $30,000 saved who quit their corporate jobs to become teachers or artists because that money gave them just enough runway to take the leap. There's this weird thing that happens where the first bit of money liberates you, and then after a certain point, more money starts to trap you because now you have more to protect, more to maintain, more to worry about losing. It's like the difference between traveling with a backpack versus traveling with 6 suitcases. Yeah, you have more stuff with the suitcases, but are you more free, or are you just more encumbered? So here's what this all comes down to. The goal shouldn't be to have the most money possible. The real goal should be to have enough money to remove the barriers between you and the life you actually want to live. For most people, that number is way lower than they think. It's not millions of dollars. It's not even hundreds of thousands. It's enough to cover emergencies, enough to have genuine choices about where you work and how you spend your time. That's usually somewhere in the $10,000 to $50,000 range, depending on your situation. That's the money that actually changes your life. Everything after that, it's gravy. It's nice, but it's not transformative in the same way. And I think if more people understood this, they'd stress less about becoming millionaires and focus more on reaching that baseline of genuine financial stability. So, if you're stressed about money, which is probably most people, here's what I'd suggest. Forget about retirement calculators telling you need $2 million. Forget about trying to keep up with people who seem to have infinite money. Instead, ask yourself, what would make me feel secure right now? For a lot of people, that number is shockingly reasonable. Maybe it's 3 months of expenses. Maybe it's 6 months. Whatever it is, that's your number. That's what you should be working toward first. And once you hit that number, a lot of your financial stress just evaporates. That acute, constant grinding stress, the 3 a.m. anxiety, the feeling of being trapped, a lot of that goes away. Look, I'm not saying money doesn't matter after $25,000. Of course it does. But what I am saying is that we've got the hierarchy all wrong in our heads. We think the jump from 0 to $1 million is linear, that each dollar matters equally. But it's not. It's not even close. The first chunk of money, that emergency fund, that financial cushion, that's the money that changes everything. That's the money that takes you from surviving to living. Everything else is just more. So if you're out there grinding, working yourself into the ground trying to hit some arbitrary number that seems impossibly far away, maybe take a step back. Maybe ask yourself, what would actually change my life right now? And maybe you'll realize that the peace of mind you're chasing is closer than you think. It's not about becoming rich, it's about becoming stable. And that $25,000, or whatever your number is, that's the money that buys you your life back. That's the money that gives you options. That's the money that lets you breathe. The rest is just details. So yeah, if you take one thing away from this, the first $25,000 you save will change your life more than the next $225,000. Focus on that. Get there and then see how you feel. Thanks for watching. Now go build that cushion. Future you will thank you for it.